All right, welcome to Toolkit Tuesday for February 2024. Thank you all for being here tonight. And I just want to ask if anybody would volunteer to open us up in prayer. Don't everybody go at once now.
Angelia, I'd be happy to.
I will.
Okay, Chris, go ahead.
Yeah, great. Dear Lord, thank you for a chance to gather and to consider and train to be ready and mindful that the environment we help generate at church is for people to feel safe and to be met by you and the people of the church. Bless this time. Thanks for what we'll learn. Amen.
Thank you so much. So I'm gonna go around and do some quick introductions. Quick, when I say quick introductions. Name, what church were you from, and what city you're in. How about that? Start anywhere you want, or I can volunteer people.
Sounds good. God bless everyone. Good evening. My name is Jose Torres. I go to St. Sabina's. I am a armor bearer for Father Louis Flager, and we are in Chicago, Illinois.
Thank you.
My name is Mary Barr, and I go to Village Point Church in Elk Grove Village.
John Warner, Village Point Church, Elk Grove Village.
Bob Torn, Online Church in Wheaton, Illinois.
Sean Shine, Saint Sabina Church, armor bearer for Father Flager.
Mary Akron, Village Point Church in Elk Grove, Illinois.
Sally Ryan, Willow Creek Church, Crystal Lake. I'm in Fox River Grove.
Gary Forcier at Village Point Church in Elk Grove.
Kevin Weber, go to Living Grace Community Church in Cary, Illinois.
I'm Chris Mays, and we attend at Parkview Community Church in Glen Ellen.
I'm Cindy Derry. I go to One Line Church in Wheaton.
Arnold Coleman from Chicago, go to Fellowship Missionary Baptist Church.
Dave Adler, Compass Church in Naperville.
Anybody else?
Phil Hunter, St. Sabina, Chicago, Illinois.
All right. I see a couple more folks, and that looks like they're still connecting my audio. So to them. Go ahead, Connie.
I'm just gonna throw it out there. I'm Connie Zub, and I serve with Church Safety Toolkit. Welcome, everybody. I'm blessed and honored that you joined us tonight.
And I have my brother with me tonight. I'm always excited when he shows up because he's a busy guy. He has lots of stuff going on. So usually my first phone call after a disastrous mass shooting. And the first thing I want to say about Tim is he's anybody's pastor. Even though he doesn't really wear that title, he gets me right here all the time. So his first love is the bride of Christ, and then his bride. And right behind that would be the safety and security of churches. And so Tim Miller is with us tonight. His resume is too long. I'm not going to try to read it to you. Former military, former law enforcement, former Secret Service, current servant, and my brother, right? So
that's right. I love you, lady. I'm glad I could be here tonight. And I wish that we were talking about more positive things. But the good news is for all of us on this call is we have the most positive news that we could possibly have. And that's we know the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. And so we know the rest of the story. And because of that, the issue for us now is how do we navigate these very troubled times that our King told us would come prior to his return when he will make things brand new. And I know in all of our hearts, we desire that. And so thank you all for loving your church, loving your Lord, your church, and those that you go to church with enough to be on this call, because I know all of us could be doing different things, but you chose to be here. And I'm grateful for that, because God has gifted all of us in unique ways according to his word. And because of that, the gifts he gives us, we must work diligently at to present them back to the Lord with as much excellence as we can. And I was talking to a pastor this week, obviously, after the Lakewood shooting, a lot of folks reached out. And the thing that is most, I think, concerning with a lot of church leadership is how rapidly the violence is increasing. And I think we all realize that the Lord says that's what's going to happen in Matthew. He talks about birth pangs, and I've never had a baby. Praise the Lord. My wife, my wife has had one, and I've watched it up close and personal. And you all know that birth pangs mean that they start out and then they get worse and closer together. And really, that's what we're seeing. We're seeing, churches that once were safe. All of us, many of us, I should say, grew up where you never even thought about church security. What's that? And now here we are. And so I really want to encourage you all, first by saying thank you, but secondly, to encourage you uniquely in the gift of the security ministry serving that God has given you. We all benefit when we go into a worship service and the worship team is excellent. They have practiced, they have prayed, they have given it to the Lord, and then boom, all of a sudden there's an atmosphere of worship. And that's because the King loves it when his children come to him and we offer our gifts with excellence. And I think the church security ministry in these days has never been more important. And I'm gonna say some things, and I really want to hear from you, but I'm gonna talk a little bit about Lakewood, but I want to first talk just a little bit about church security as a ministry. What is that? And you guys hear this from me all the time, but a ministry is something that is presented to the Lord. It's not about us or our giftedness or our talents or our experiences. It's about the Lord working through us to offer an excellent offering unto him. And why do I say that? And I'm just going to get real with you because I love you all. I think over the last 5 or 10 years, a lot of church security ministries have become gun-centric and not God-centric. And although I understand, and you do too, and anybody's heard my brother Mark Lundgren, his favorite line is, you're more likely to get hit by lightning than to be in an active violent situation in a church. And although that's true, it doesn't mean we don't prepare for that. It just means that's not our focus. And unfortunately, with a lot of church security ministries, we have kind of taken, and I see this a lot. I was recently consulting with a huge church out on the West Coast, and I noticed just running around, and not condemning them, they just hadn't really thought about it, but the focus was on fatigues and open display of weapons, and although that's their choice, and I'm not condemning how different churches, certainly there's a role for uniform presence in a church, that I think that can intimidate people that are hurting if everybody's that way from coming in and getting the help. Because I do want to remind us that first and foremost, our churches are hospitals. They are filled with broken people, by the way, like you and I, that need the Lord's love. They need the compassion. And so as we think about church security as a ministry, we have to think about, how are we growing? And I'm just going to ask you, how are you growing your skills and gifts that God's given to you so that you can be more excellent? And some of the things we talk about regularly. If you've ever come to a secure church training, we're talking way more about communication. And my brother and hero Dave Adler's on this call. He's going to tell you a whole lot. I've learned so much about what happens in the middle of a fire, a weather emergency, a medical emergency, all the things Angelia and Dave talk about, you just can't know enough about, because those are the things primarily that we're going to need. And guess what? We're going to need them more in the days ahead, because more things are beginning to come to the church. I know we know this. If you've heard, me talk about this in the past, mental illness in the United States is at an epidemic rise. We are seeing more mentally ill people per capita than we've ever seen in the history of our country. As a matter of fact, the National Alliance for Mental Illness says that between 1 in 4 or 1 in 5 Americans is clinically mentally ill, meaning a diagnosis plus medication. Well, that's not a bad thing. That's just where we are. Many people are struggling, and what an opportunity it is for a church security ministry to deal with that effectively, but it takes skill. We talk about.
I'm gonna jump in here for 1 second, Tim.
Yeah.
So we do Toolkit Tuesday, the 3rd Tuesday of every month. And oftentimes people come say, well, we're part of the security team, well, we're part of the safety team. How those things differ? So I just want to talk about that for a quick second, just so people are clear.
Yeah.
Our focus at Church Safety Toolkit are first line ministries, parking lot people, ushers, greeters, children's ministries. And how do those people effectively see, understand, and communicate with the security teams? Tim's focus is security teams and how does he prepare those folks? The deal is we work this way. He and I work hand in hand. Security and first line ministries have to go hand in hand inside your organization. So he'll talk a lot about security. I didn't want our regulars to go, well, we don't normally talk about security, but we have to, because those things go hand in hand. I'm not a security person, hence you have Tim tonight. And Dave Adler, who also has an equally long resume, kind of snuck in there and just briefly introduced himself. So we'll talk to him in a minute too. Go ahead, Tim.
No, that's such a great point, Angelia, because I would remind you that, if you talk about a key volunteer or a staff person and a security ministry person, there's no difference. A staff person may very well be the person that recognizes the danger first. Parking lots. Look how many active violence incidents have started in parking lots. So it's a great point. And I guess if you really think about it, we all need to be trained. That's one of the things I really loved, with you at Willow, Angela, is the importance of recognizing that safety and security go hand in hand. All the more reason why you may be in the parking lot dealing with that mentally ill person first. And so as we grow together, the mission is the ministry of safety and security. And that's where I think we all want to be. So with that said, the reason I laid that foundation is, folks, our mindsets have to change based on what God's word says. We are going to experience more serious and more frequent incidents at churches across the country. We're going to see domestic violence increase. We're going to see custodial issues increase. Oh, by the way, everyone on this call could be right in the middle of it, whether you choose to or not. It just could happen. And so that's where it's all about being prayed up and prepared. And that's what I love about what you're doing here. So let's pause for a second and talk about what happened at Lakewood. As best we know, and the information so far that I've read, you may even have more updated information. The woman, here we go, had an issue, a clear issue with mental illness, diagnosed severe mental illness, had some issues going on similar to what we saw in Nashville with a gender identity issue. Here's the point, though. She had a relationship with the church, everybody's trying to figure out how long, but at least it was, for a period of time prior to her coming and attacking the church. And we saw the same thing at Covenant School in Nashville. The lady who attacked there had an extensive history with the school, and many folks along the journey said, well, this person is likely to become violent. So that's a great takeaway. And that's what I would ask you, how does your church process information about people that may very well be known by a lot of people as potentially violent, but we, for whatever reason, privacy, dignity, however we want to describe it, we don't step forward? And let me be clear, if a person's struggling, then we ought to be very careful with that information. But when a person crosses a line and begins to make potentially, if Dave Young was on this call, he pre-violence indicators, we really need to make sure we're communicating that very wisely within the church staff, and then the church staff has to immediately get folks involved that can help assess that situation. Because remember, we talk about this a lot in the Secret Service. I had been a police officer, and I'm nothing but respect for police officers, but we were trained to be reactive in nature. We were trained to come and try to mitigate a problem, or, if it's a violent issue, to try to minimize the violence. The Secret Service was the opposite. It's proactive in nature. It means that we have an actual plan in place, starting with the parking lot, that we can identify and deal with threats, potential threats, even beyond that, actually, because now we're training a lot about identifying folks, from social media and threat management and all those kinds of things. But then we have a visible presence in the parking lot, and then we have ushers and greeters, and then we have sanctuary folks. And those principles apply. I get a lot of questions. Well, we have a small church. Great. You do the same thing. You just don't do it, as large with the numbers as some of the other churches that are larger. But you have those things in place. So let's talk about Lakewood. We have a person who was very upset with her ex-spouse or current spouse going through a divorce, custodial issues, psychiatric issues. There are reports that she was being investigated for abusing her son, who obviously was held in her arms as she began the shooting and who was subsequently shot. She entered the church, interestingly enough, after a main service, okay? And that's important, because after a main service, at the beginning of a Spanish service, there was a lull there. There's still a police presence there, but there was a lull there. Well, why does that matter? We saw in the New Life shooting, and this was many years ago, that the person waited until most people had left and actually watched the police drive away before that attack was initiated. So what does that tell us? It tells us that just because church services have ended does not mean that safety and security has ended. And, as a rule of thumb, when I was running our church safety and security effort, we stayed at least an hour past the last person to leave. And here's a really important point when we're talking about church security 101. Remember that most violent incidents at churches occur during the week, not just on the weekends. And in this case, it did occur during the weekend, but it occurred after a major service. So what do we know? She went in, she began engaging immediately with a long gun. That's another similarity. Covenant was a long gun. The Covenant shooter, which I'm intentionally not mentioning names, they shot into the building through glass doors. Another takeaway, just because you have a locked door, does that mean that the church is in fact safe? So that's something else that you need to think about. and then gained entry and then went on a killing spree. Well, that was this person's intention at Lakewood too, to go in and to harm as many people, hopefully making it into the sanctuary. Now, there are a couple pointers that I would suggest are important in the Lakewood attack. Number one is this person, although the weather was relatively warm, this person was wearing a big black overcoat. And from what I hear from some of the folks I've talked to, there was no visible or even monitoring process in the parking lot. So that meant, now I want you to think about that. She was able to pull into the church to take a rifle out, same thing in Covenant, hide the rifle, pick up the child, and walk into a main entrance where, fortunately, she was engaged by 3 off-duty police officers, and then obviously lost the battle, and horrible, horrible tragedy. So it does remind us, what were there ushers there that would have been able to look out and see this person coming towards the doors? And to say, hey, wait, something's not right here. This person is behaving strangely. Were there parking lot people that were able to visually see perhaps her getting out of a vehicle? Were there cameras that were observing the parking lot areas that could have potentially prevented that, or at least stopped it out in the parking lot? And that's the difference between security and law enforcement. And again, if we put proactive measures in place, the ability for us to thwart or stop it becomes significantly greater. Now, fortunately, the officers, 3 of them, were able to disperse, from what I understand, significant number of rounds exchanged, but ultimately they stopped the threat. Now, you do have to ask yourself the question, if you attend a church where after the last service, the clock's ticking, that officer's got to go, would it be wise to say, in today's times, maybe keeping them there a little bit longer, watching those volunteers get to their cars, especially in the evenings? Is that a wise thing to do? And then you look at the response, and I'm sure you all have looked at the same videos that I had from inside. It was chaos inside. I saw police officers, not really directing anybody because they're trying to figure it out too. But while shots are being fired, people are screaming towards the exits. And my thoughts were, wow, if you have rounds being fired and you're running towards an exit, how do you know with ricochet whether or not you're running right out? So that's a great takeaway point. If you're inside, if you're a staff member, if you're a key volunteer, do you know what to do if in fact shots are fired? And those are the processes that we train, not in the midst of a crisis, but way before. Those are the, with Dave and Angelique, those are the emergency operations plan codified and then put into practice where everybody knows what to do. And anybody that's ever heard me, present on crisis preparation knows the data is clear. In the middle of a crisis, 90% of the skills you need are right here. So are we asking as a team, what would I do if? What would I do if? What would I do if? And then the other thing is fresh security assessments. Now, let me caution you, this has become a cottage industry. There are a lot of folks out here doing assessments with no formal training, and certainly not the background to be, and let me be clear, I'm a Marine, I love the Marine Corps. I learned nothing in the Marine Corps about how to do a church security assessment. I learned how to fight wars. As a police officer, I learned how to enforce laws. So it is important that if you do an assessment, that you do an assessment with a qualified, pedigreed person, because then you're going to get the information that you desperately need to prepare in advance. And so when you put the whole Lakewood thing together, there's one more important piece, and this is not criticism. I praise God for those officers. I'm thankful that my heart breaks that that lady lost her life. She was clearly mentally ill, needing significant amounts of help. But after the fact, there was a press conference, and the senior pastor came out and said, I'm just glad that it didn't happen at the 11 o'clock service because it would have been horrifically worse. Folks, in the Secret Service, there's a phenomenon we're very aware of, and those are folks that are on the edge anyway, and they're copycats. They're looking for a purpose in life that involves excessive extreme violence. We saw this phenomenon at Columbine with Dylan and Klebold. They were so analyzed in their planning and how they put everything together. Well, that spurred a lot of follow-on school attacks where the goal was simple. Hey, we want to outdo Columbine. We want to make it worse. And so one of the things you want to consider, if there ever was a serious situation at your church with active violence, who's going to speak on behalf of the church, and what's the message that's going to be said? The messaging is huge, because the messaging can either bring peace or it can incite. In a case where you're saying, I'm glad it didn't happen at X, for a person that doesn't like your church anyway, they're going to go, oh, that's a great idea. Wouldn't have thought about that. So we really want to make sure that from start to finish, that we have a plan, and then you get into, Angela and Dave do this masterfully, but the where you bring everybody back. I'm sorry, Angela, in my mind, I want to say reconciliation, but it's what's the term?
Reunification.
Yeah, reunification, site plan. Those are things as well, because again, in this case, remember, there's a lot of confusion and a lot of people don't know where family members are. And although, praise God, this wasn't a mass casualty event, a reunification plan, especially for a large venue, is just absolutely huge. So I think, the takeaway for me was having armed police officers is a win. But I have found that many churches can't afford it. They don't have the resources. If, in fact, we're going to not have an armed uniformed police officer there, then the question is, well, who is there? What are their qualifications, certifications, and background and training? And then how do we best employ them? And one of the challenges that I find in a lot of churches, it's important that we have people that are armed to protect our congregation. I'm not arguing that for a second, but it really matters where those people that are armed are posted. In the Secret Service, we had a lot of folks that were fully able to address the threat, but they were strategically placed in key positions. An example, one of the things we learned in the Secret Service is the president was most vulnerable at your arrival and departure areas. Why? That's where people knew he would be. Well, if somebody's angry with your pastor, if somebody's upset, where could they target them? And I wish we didn't have to have these conversations, but the reality is we do. And I just pray that we would all be, wise. And I think the biggest thing I would encourage everybody on this call, there has to be a mindset shift. The shift needs to come from security that I would kind of call it ad hoc. It's not really planned carefully. It's not really thoughtfully posted. It's not really considered for out of weekend services timeframes. because I think we would all, agree that the Charleston massacre was horrible, just as bad as it can get. And it was a Wednesday night Bible study. And again, we're not talking fear here, folks. I hope that's not what's coming across. What's coming across is wisdom and preparation for these days that the Lord says will come. Because if anything needs to be strong, it's the church of Jesus Christ. And we have to think differently about the planning, the preparation, and then the regular training. And I'm not just talking about, hey, we bring a guy in or a person in and they go through this. And, I'm talking about, I love, Angela, I loved your model of just every week. That's what we did at Christ Fellowship. We would just in roll call say, hey, what would we do if? What would we do if? And so with that said, I hope it's helpful, and I'd love to answer any questions or hear any thoughts anybody has.
I'm going to throw up a slide real quick, a couple. I'm going to walk us through a slideshow. And then we're going to do Q&A with Tim, and then we're going to introduce Dave. Because he thinks that he's just sliding in here, but he's got work tonight too. I'm sorry.
You should start with him. I'm just saying.
No,
He's the smarter of the two.
So we got to go to the Q&A. So I'm going to share a slide real quick. Tell me when you can see it. Can you guys see it?
Yes.
So this is what I call the emergency timeline. And any of you that have worked with us have seen this. So if you Google church security, you'll get a lot of hits. If you Google church safety, you get far less. So safety is just what we're doing now. This is it. We're planning and you're talking about it and you're being proactive. That's in the planning part. And then everything Tim just talked about in terms of ministry training, it has to happen continuously. You got to normalize the conversation, put it in the water, tell it to people over and over. And we do the safety moment. And it's 60 to 90 seconds, little chunks of information, because people aren't going to retain, long sermonettes about safety. So little chunks of information every week, a different topic. What happens when an actual event happens? If you go back and watch the Lakewood footage, security responds, just what Tim said earlier. They're reactive. They're going to show up when somebody calls. The other thing we need to train our senior leaders, like pastors, is as soon as first responders come, they got to stand down. Like they can interface with them to a certain degree, but then the first responders are going to own the building, take over, and they're going to do everything there. Then we move into post-event and then reunification, which are additional safety functions. So I just wanted to talk about that for a second. This is another one that Tim talked about briefly. Who's going to do what? If you don't have something that looks like this, it's part of your emergency response plan. We can help you put it in. But who is your public information officer? Who's standing in front of that camera? And what are they going to say? Because the media is on their way immediately, right? So that's on the other things. These are just tools. He talked about being hit by lightning, probably more prevalent than you're going to get gunshots. What are you doing in a medical situation, a fire, weather, or an armed intruder, right? So those are just some of the things. I'll stop sharing, but those are just some of the things that are in the emergency response plans. And those are the things we try to help you create or there is an incident. It's not to create it and sit it on the shelf so it looks cute. It's not so it collects dust. It's so you keep re-upping it. When those volunteers leave who used to do that, who's the new person that's doing that? It needs to be reviewed all the time. So I'll open up the floor now to Q&A for Tim, and then we'll talk to Dave. Who's got questions, comments, concerns?
I would like to add to the conversation. This is Arnold Coleman.
Go right ahead.
I always enjoy you, Tim, and we're still working on the back end to fulfill some objectives. But we really have to reimagine, only to imagine what this thing that we call security, church security, looks like. We've come from different dispensations and so forth as to how we have laid out plans of what we didn't even know that fell under the title of security, safety and security, but now we're in a dispensation where it actually takes on that particular name call. So what is it and how is it unilaterally placed across the board where churches and institutions of such can have a plan in place? There are so many different issues psychologically as to how the church has been ran, location of the church. There's so many different variables. And I'm glad to see and hear that St. Sabina is on the line. But in the Chicagoland area, it's a very unique situation. And I do agree, combining the concepts of safety and security is very important. But we have to look at that and see what that really means, because we're taking a group of people, not essentially don't have background in the areas that we're talking about, that will establish some levels of hesitation or areas feel like they can't operate in that. So I think we have a charge of simplifying this thing to the point where just where you are in the functionality that you do, and I think this lends more to your area of safety, Angelia, where if you're doing the ushering and the greeting, okay, let's teach them techniques of territorial, situational processes where you're able to look and see what's in order versus what's out of order, what may be coming in that might raise concerns. Let's take people where they are and try to build them up into the plan. I totally agree. This whole gun concept coming into the 21st century is necessary, but coming out of the 20th century, it wasn't. And so how do we prepare for these nuances to build out safety plans that is inclusive? And so I think therein lies the struggle. Tim, you do an excellent job in laying out these processes relative to intel, because there's a section for that, having to gather information, and that's what we were blessed so much for receiving from you and Mark. What may happen to one community, depending on the relationship that your pastors have with these, maybe with these other organizations, you have to look and see the correlations if you need to plan that out too. So,
but I just want to stop you for 1 second, because here's the reality.
yes.
I came out of a little Baptist church in Mississippi, and I came to Chicago and I went to a medium-sized Baptist church, and then I went to Willow Creek. It's the same issues at different scales, and every church is different. We were with the church this past weekend, and their issues are the same, but their size is different. So across the board, it's the same issue. So my point is, I don't think that we can unilaterally do anything, in my opinion. We are, Tim and Dave and I are headed out to Connecticut soon for a church that's doing some things. Then we have people on this call who are light years ahead of churches that I've seen, and they are doing great work. We visited with them and they come to our conference and we utilize their buildings for some functions. I think every single church, they could be next door to each other, has to be looked at individually. I don't think that we're going to create anything that's a cookie cutter. I just don't believe that that's
I mean, that's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying too.
Yeah,
I'm saying that very thing. Each area is unique within its own self. Yes, the big picture, you know, I mean, I've heard it say you get struck with lightning before you get an active shooter. You know, each situation requires an assessment on their daily operations, their church activities, etc., only to be assessed and put those things. Yes, areas of coverage.
If I just grab the ERP from our last conference sitting on my desk, there's topics in here, but for every topic that's in here, it's going to be completely different for every church. And which is why we worked on them individually. We had them like bring their individual plans to the conference so we could work on it. But I'm gonna hold you right there, Deacon Coleman. I got one question in the chat. And it says, I thought you said the woman was met by 3 police officers as she came in. This is for you, Tim. Did they allow her to enter the sanctuary? And she started shooting during the Spanish speaking service?
No, actually, if that was communicated, I misspoke. She was met in the lobby. She made entry into the church and was immediately engaged by 3 police officers that were posted in the lobby area. And I've been to Lakewood. If you've ever been to Lakewood, it's massive.
It's massive. Yes.
It is massive. So they're very fortunate, which was wise because remember that the other services had let out and their security plan, as I understand it, focused their resources on the next service beginning, which that was the entry and exit point that the suspect came in and began shooting. So she did not make it into the sanctuary. The police officer stopped her. I will tell you, I watched some video. It's a stadium in essence. And, sound is funny, especially gunshots. We just did 3 days of firearms training, and I was amazed at the different calibers, the different sounds. I was reminded again. But sound travels, and there were people, while there was an active gunfight, that were walking through the lobby area. I was like, well, maybe that's a training point. Has anybody ever heard, weapons fire? But just really quick, like I do want to do a quick handoff to Dave because he's the master, and all of us have the privilege of working together with. He really hits the ball out of the park with more frequent things like fire or explosions. And folks, let me just remind you, I worked terrorism after 9/11 exclusively. Everybody I'm talking to now is saying, I mean, when you're hearing the FBI director say red lights flashing, it's one thing to have a mentally ill person with a rifle. It's another thing to have a trained, organized team. And that's where we're going in the days ahead. And that's where a comprehensive security plan. I always said, and I train literally thousands of folks at the church where I was, there are 2 things everybody needs to know. Everybody: safety, security, staff, what to look for and what to do if you see it. What to look for. If it's suspicious behavior, that's on the person's side. What if it's smoke? What if it's fire? And I think those are the things, although it's complex, it's really not. The principles are the same. When we would go in the Secret Service, we would basically do the same thing at every venue. We'd establish outer perimeters, then we'd establish, folks at the doors and all that, and then, wherever the meeting place was. So I would just encourage you, it starts with that plan that Angelia just, because if you're working through the plan, you're actually working through how to do the plan. You can't do the plan without thinking how you would do the plan. And so you put the plan together and then you train it. And Dave, I'd love to hear your thoughts on Lakewood, though. I know you've watched it from a different perspective and a higher altitude than mine.
Before you jump, we got one more question.
Okay.
I'm not sure it's really a question, but just 2 comments. One was, when I heard that it was a female shooter, I was the first thing that I was surprised by is that it was female, because most shooters are not.
That's
the
correct.
second thing, when I heard that she had some mental health issues, and when I realized it was her child who passed away, could this have possibly been a death by suicide situation? Those are my 2 comments.
Those are great points too, and I think those are the things, honestly, that are going to take weeks and months. We still haven't even seen the full disclosure on what happened in Nashville. The thought process is, we do know that she was diagnosed schizophrenic. And when you start talking multiple personality disorders, and then you add the stress of, apparently it was a very contentious divorce she was going through, and then the gender issues, and then the active investigations. I mean, that was a boiling pot getting ready, to go. So I agree with you. I mean, I think there are a lot more questions that need to be answered.
Yeah, than answers right now, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, but at the same this to me that should alert us all that don't ignore the female.
Mm-hmm.
Don't ignore the fact that it
Okay.
could be. Now, I'm not saying that to be ugly towards my own gender, but it's like, yeah, we can have some ladies out there who intend to do harm for whatever reason.
Yeah, that's a great point.
And
That is.
there are cultures who train the women to do harm. There is
Well, and that's also true.
Yeah.
But it's like, we should never assume that, oh well, she's white. It's a female and she's got a long trench coat on, and it's like she's safe. We should always assume, regardless of gender, however you're dressed, however you're looking, whatever, that you could still be a bad egg.
I caution people to never stereotype anybody.
That's right.
Not race, not gender, not size, not anything. And when we talk about it, we talk about literally your gut reaction. If you feel it, right? Because we're spiritual beings having a human experience. If you feel it, I need you to pay attention to that. And don't go, oh, well, I just see him all the time and I thought it was okay. No.
No. And I think
talk yourself out of it. Do not.
And sadly, as a nurse, especially a critical care nurse, it's like we've always been taught you trust your gut. You go with your gut. And I don't know if that's something that men also are trained to do or not, but I know that a lot of girls, it's like females, it's like you go with your gut and you feel something. You feel something deep down in there. And I hope men do that also, because it's a great, if you don't, you need to kind of like internalize that and try to pay attention to it.
Yeah, never talk yourself out of it is what I tell people. I got 2 questions in the chat.
Okay.
How do you suggest to bring the non-security team positions to accept a role of stopping or interacting with a potential problem person?
Great question. And the answer is that we're all on the security and safety team. We all have a purpose for, helping to keep our congregation safe. Now, what I'm not suggesting is obviously that you're going into harm's way if someone's coming in with a weapon. That's not what I'm suggesting. What I am suggesting is that troubled person. The first step for any troubled person for me, and I have some training and usually am always armed, would be to talk to them compassionately, kindly. Even mental health issues I have found, if and there's some great training out there. The National Alliance for Mental Illness provides training. But the bottom line is that we have to be the hands and feet of Christ. And that means we have to be willing to just step up, smile. Hey, welcome. Is this your first? And if they're angry or whatever, then maybe we can get a dialogue going with them while we're also allowing time for others to come who maybe have more training and experience to do that. But it starts with all of us recognizing that we're on the team. All of us have a responsibility to help protect our congregation. Now, good training, and I literally, I trained every volunteer at every campus, and they always came up to me and said after the mental health awareness training, after the de-escalation, oh, this is so great. It's good training for life. And so that's, as you're in a church and you get good training, it's going to ripple out and it's going to make people safer.
Yeah, 2 things on that. Our brother Mark, who's not with us tonight, is former FBI. Him and Tim battle all the time between who was the greatest, right? So
no, he's the greatest. I give up.
But he gave us an 80-page document at one point that we boiled down to 3 letters: OAA. Observe, assess, act. What are we observing? How are we observing? Who are we observing? What are we assessing? How are we assessing? How do we act? So there is a whole process around that. It's one that we teach: observe, assess, act. and it is for the non-security team. One of the things we talk about in the safety moments is we are not the security team. How do you observe, assess, act, and bring the security team in to take a look? So those are things that we teach. I think Sean asked that question for non-security positions to help them understand how to interface and communicate with the security teams. I hope that makes sense. Tim just said something else. When you do training all the time, it ripples outside of the church. So we were doing a training one night of our guest experience team, and we are literally in the church in training. My phone starts going off, and I'm like, who's texting? We're in training. So I go and take a look, and it is one of our guest experience team members and his wife are on their way overseas somewhere, but they stopped in Istanbul, and there was a shooting in the airport while they were there. And they said everything we taught them came back to them. And when the shooting happened, a kid had got separated from his parents. And they grabbed this kid and they locked themselves down and they did the hide method. So it ripples into your personal life. Same thing with the things Dave will talk about. How do you find an AED in an airport? How do you find that, right? Like all these things, because every day we're living life with all kinds of potential safety issues. Last question in the chat, and then Dave, you're on. How do you prepare parishioners without alarming them? Should churches start sending out info on security as well?
That is a great question. And let me just really encourage you. People are very much aware of what's happening in our country. It was amazing because as I began to enhance security in our children's ministry, some of the leadership was very concerned. Oh, parents are gonna ask why, and they did. And I told them, I said, you know why? It's because we love your kids. We really do. We want to make sure we're going to go the extra mile to make sure this is a safe environment. Not because there's this big looming threat. It's just wise. And I always found that as a matter of fact, we had folks join our church because we had enhanced security measures at the church. So I always encourage you when you're talking to parishioners about security, the thing is, man, we love you and we're just trying to, make it as safe with everything going on out here. We want to make it as safe as we can when you come to church. Because I will tell you this, Mark says this often in some of his threat briefings. After a major attack, how many people do you think refuse to come back to church? And so again, if we're able to stay ahead of it, we're proactive, we're prayed up, we're prepared, win. So I hope that answers the question.
One of the things I tell people too when preparing a children's plan, you have to have special attention paid to the parents of infants to school age.
Mm-hmm.
They don't know any of this. The school age kids are going to lead us. You know why?
Yeah.
They don't know a world before 9/11. They don't know a world before armed intruders. They don't know a world. So they drill it. They drill it like we used to hide under desks for the nuclear bombs in our day, right? And so they drill it. So the school age kids will know exactly what to do. They literally will lead that teacher or that leader in that moment. The newborns to school age parent is going to be where you should spend a little bit more energy trying to help.
And that's just one final note on that. You better make sure that the parents know that you have a good plan.
Yeah.
Because nobody's going to stop me from getting to my grandkid if I don't think you have a good plan. So it's important. Yeah.
This is a tough one. All right, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Adler. So again, resume too long. I'm not even going to attempt to give it to you. What I know about the man is he's probably co-pastoring with Tim. He loves Jesus. He loves the Big C Church.
Praise the Lord.
Safety at one point was part of our Illinois emergency management team here in Illinois. And I am grateful for Dave and all the things that he does. So Dave, you got the floor.
Thank you so much, Angelina. I just love your heart and I love Tim's heart. And again, number one, it's a ministry. Everything we're doing here, our churches, they're a hospital for sick people, whether it's physical, whether it's spiritual, emotional. At our church, we just had a schizophrenic woman in the parking lot that our parking lot team found for us. And she was confused. She didn't know really where she was. She was saying things. She was trying to give them tickets to a bar. And they called the emergency response team at our church, came out there, took a look, and it was she was in her late 50s, early 60s, and she made enough sense, and then she'd drift away, and then she'd come back, and then she'd go, okay, I got my keys. I'm just going to go home now. Thank you very much. No, 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 no. And we were able to find out who her family was, gave them a call, and she cycled where she would take her medication and then she wouldn't. And they didn't know she had stopped taking her medication. And it was our parking lot team kept someone from possibly being injured or killed in a really bad car crash that Sunday afternoon. And it was the parking team. They were the heroes that day because nobody else would have seen her. She was outside in her car, and they just knocked on the window. Are you okay? Is there anything we could do for you? And it was the power of okay, how are you? Hello. And, and what Tim has been saying here, we need to act. Everything with our plans and our training helps us to act during an emergency and not react in an emergency. There's around an 80% chance when you go into a restaurant, if you find a second exit, maybe a third exit, you have an 80% chance of survival over everybody else in that restaurant because you have a second exit, because you're acting now. You've got additional slides in your head. Everyone else, if there's an explosion, a fire, a shooter, anybody violent, where are they going for? They're going for that door in a reflex action that they came in. They didn't take the time to turn around and look, okay, I'm going through that back door, or I'm taking a chair and I'm going through the window. That's okay. All bets are off when the place is on fire or there's a shooter. You do what you need to do. But that gives you and your family right now an 80% chance of survival over everybody else in that restaurant. That's huge. And that's something this ministry we have, it's just not for church. It's for your home. It's for your neighbors. If there's a fire, 80% of firemen that die in the line of duty in a fire situation are dying in residential home fires. They're not dying in the churches, in the industrial buildings, big commercial buildings. Those have smoke detectors that are monitored. Most of them, the vast majority, have sprinkler systems. It's your home that you don't generally have a sprinkler system, a very minute amount do. And then, when was the last time I changed the battery on my smoke detector? Did you know one of the first things that smoke does, it affects your logical thinking? I was on a fire where we pulled up on an apartment building 5:30 in the morning on a Saturday morning, and I was a brand new firefighter, only on the job 2 years. And this officer comes running out. We've got a fire. Give me extra help. Da 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 da. And it was a one apartment, a 3-story building, and there was no smoke in the hallway at all. There was a smoky fire in one apartment. And long story short, 3 people died and a baby died. And it wasn't a hot fire. It was smoky. And when we got inside there, we crashed through that door, and a guy died with his hand on the doorknob, on the back of the doorknob, because the first thing all those toxic fumes do, it affects your logical thinking. He had his hand on the doorknob, but he didn't remember why he wanted to turn it, why he wanted to get out. There were hand marks all around the walls, sooted black. It was all black and soot. It was a couch fire. It was a small fire, but there were hand marks, and we don't know which adult it was, had their hands on the windowsill. All they had to do was unlock it and open it, and it might have saved everyone. But the smoke affected their thinking. And they didn't know how to open up the window, why they wanted to open up the window. And this is, again, this is why we need to be prepared. We need to plan, we need to train. There's 5 main components, actions that we're really going to take. One, we're always going to have, and it's medical emergencies. I guarantee you the most active emergency you're going to have is medical emergencies. It's just going to happen. Your diabetics, your seizure patients, your heart attacks, a slip and fall with the ice and snow. But then after that, the 4 main actions that you're going to have after medical emergencies is evacuation, then shelter, you might do a lockdown, and then reunification. And I really like the way Tim and Angelina were talking about reunification. Think about, if your parents in your church that have kids, if they don't have trust in your children's program that their kids are going to be safe, boy, oh boy, every single parent's going for their kid no matter what. But if you train the teachers first to get the kids out, and you think about it, we're in Chicago. In the middle of June, it's a lot different than in the middle of January when it's 37 below, there's 8 inches of snow outside, and taking them outside is a life threat. Our church makes sure that there's a bus located close to the children where the babies are in that, and get them inside the bus. And depending on the size of your church, the size of your building, there's vertical evacuation, there's horizontal. Some of you have churches so large that you could literally take them 500 feet away inside the building. And if the weather conditions are 37 below, do a horizontal evacuation to the very opposite end of the building and protect in place there. Make sure you've got an exit there, but you're not taking them from a potential area to a life threat area outside, and then all the different types of situations we could be involved in. We've talked about violent intruder, medical emergencies, but again, in Chicago, we have severe weather. We could have flooding, we could have tornadoes, earthquakes. We don't have wildfires, but depending on where you are in the United States, you have wildfires, you have hurricanes, and there's 3 different kinds of planning we need to do also. One is, where you have a long time to prepare, like a special event. Then there's intermediate, where you have 2 to 3 days to plan. It might be like a funeral. And for some of you, a funeral might have a lot of threats involved, especially if it was a political situation, gangs are involved. How many times do you hear a shootout at a church during a funeral? The gangs are waiting for the opposing gang to show up, and then they start taking them out. And then the other type of planning is the spontaneous events. These are your acts of violence, your severe weather, your no notice events. So, and what happens if your church has a power outage? Our church had a massive power outage about 5 or 6 years ago. And while they were looking into it, they found out that the transformer was owned by the church. It wasn't owned by ComEd. And they had to order another transformer to be built in Canada where this one was built. Nobody knew it. So again, and we had to get a semi generator to power the entire sanctuary and the HVAC system and everything else. So there's a lot of things involved here. But again, it all comes back to a solid emergency operation plan and your training so you can act instead of reacting.
Absolutely, Dave. Thanks for that. While he was talking, a couple of things came to mind. When we talk about planning, he talked about evacuation, sheltering, lockdown, reunification. Do you have that plan? Do you know who your mutual aid partner is? Do you know where you can go? Do you know who can come to you? So when we talk about major disasters, it's important to know who can pastor you in the moment. If you have a large church, so I go back to Willow, 7 campuses, each one of those pastors is on their respective stage at 11 o'clock. If one campus has a shooting, those pastors are still on their stages in their respective locations. The pastor here doesn't know where his wife and kids are. He's limpid in that moment. So we have partnered with Salvation Army. They will send you chaplains right away. They will go to the reunification site with you. They will help you deliver difficult news if you have to tell parents that your child has been injured or deceased. Those are things you need to know. Those are part of your plan. Are there numbers on your windows at your church? The fire department pulls up. Do they know you're at window number 9? Or do they know if you're at window number 13? Have you labeled those? What happens if it's not during a service? Like Tim talked about, there was a lull in that service. Some of our churches have conferences. And so they're on a conference break and they're walking around and everybody's grabbing snacks and going to the bathroom. What happens then? You're not contained inside that auditorium. So you have to think about what happens after a service, what happens during a conference, what happens if you're outdoors like Kansas City or Highland Park or any of those things that have happened recently. So these are all things that need to go inside of your plan. So planning is really, really, really important. And again, don't just put it on the shelf. Keep updating it, keep adding to it. The things we talk about now are not the things we talked about 6 months ago or 9 months ago or a year ago. These things keep escalating and changing, escalating and changing. So you better be updating your plans. We're all here to help if you need help. You know, Tim and Dave are a little more famous than me, so I have a little more time than them. You probably can't call them and get them to like just weigh in. You can shoot us a note. I'll get to them if we need them. Do we have any more questions? Let me go back to the chat. Do we have any more questions for Tim and Dave while we have them?
I've got one more item for you. Is 2 weeks ago, the churches in our area have built a church alliance. And there's like 13, 14 churches, and it's for safety and security. And a couple of weeks ago, there was a Night to Shine event at Calvary Church out west in Aurora, and they needed some help. And at the same time, and there was close to, I don't know, 800 to 1,000 people there just for Night to Shine for these kids with special needs. And at the same time, though, they had 200, 250 people with a Spanish romantic dinner, couples dinner at the same time in another part of the building. And they reached out to that alliance and said, we need some help with safety and security. And so a handful of the churches around were able to come out there and help support them and reach out to the churches that are around you. You know, don't be afraid to reach out. You have trained people that are out there that we have the opportunity to help serve another church. And I tell you, we were so more blessed than I feel like those kids were. But the parents, even that night, many of those parents have never had a night off. And they were able to have a respite night where they had a romantic dinner, a husband and a wife, with just 2 other couples at a table, with a DJ, with some soft music, some low lights. The church provided a wonderful meal. What a ministry.
Amen.
And that was supported by mental health, medical teams, and security teams.
Can I tell you how jealous I am, Dave? I was building a community alliance like that for everyone around Willow because it's so big.
Yeah.
We were talking to like the what's it called now? It used to be Sears Center and Harper College and all the people around us for mutual aid because they're so big. Like, where do they go? If you know, anyway, I'm so jealous. That's a great, great, great idea. I love it. Love it. Yeah, if you can get neighborhoods and communities involved, Get to know your police department, get to know your fire department. That's really important. And I always say, as much as we need them, they need us. So you don't know the condition of the heart of that officer who's at work on a Sunday. You don't know the condition of his marriage or his health or anything else. And so we invite them into the building and we make sure they have coffee and they hang out. It's a deterrent, but we get to love on them when they're there. It's great. So yeah, get to know your first responders. It's really important.
Yeah, Dave, this is Chris. I sent you an IM. I'd be honored to know about that church alliance, please, right? At Parkview, we would be happy to participate, and we host big events that sometimes for our team, it's hard to field enough folks that are trained and have the ability to do this, right? So if you'd be so kind, please send that on.
And absolutely. And please remember, we've got Easter coming.
Yes.
This is going to be a major target, and we are going to have some of the highest populations in our churches. We're standing up a emergency operations center. We only have 6 locations. We don't have that many, but we have 6 locations. We're expecting all of them to be maxed out, and we have an incident action plan, and we know exactly who the heads are for every one of those sites. Who's worship arts, who's the pastor, who's going to be logistics if we need something at a church, and all the contacts, and who's the lead, for safety and security. This is important. This is the time right now you have to prepare your churches for Easter.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that idea. That is amazing. That's amazing work, Dave. That's so great.
I have I guess a comment, a question. I know Mary Barr and maybe Gary can comment on it further, because Mary sent myself and Gary a link to a gentleman on YouTube. I think it's Christian Warrior. It's a gentleman who also manages church security, and he is said that there's a House bill. I believe it's a House bill coming up where they're looking at banning paramilitary groups, and that the concern is that church security teams are going to be housed under that name as being paramilitary. Is that something anyone else has heard of?
Yeah, so I heard that the other day. I'm doing a little bit of digging, and I'm hoping to talk to a few people, and then we'll put it up on the website and we figure it out. But yeah, I don't have an answer for that one yet.
Okay, okay.
You're on
Thank
mute.
you.
Tim, you're on mute if you're talking.
Yeah, I think it's a Senate bill, and it's proposed highly, extremely political right now, back and forth. And the language of the bill itself is not specifically targeting churches. There's been a lot of that rhetoric, but it's actually any organization that provides any kind of training that could in any way affect the rights of others. So that's where it's kind of stretching towards any kind of training organization, which ours is one, as well as church security. But I think what I've encouraged people to do is just get in contact with your representative and let them know, hey, the concern in that obviously would in essence negate the church's ability to protect itself organically, and that would require police presence, which good luck with that, if you think of every church asking for a police officer. So I'm not sure that there's, I mean, I know that particular individual has skyrocketed the issue, but I'm not sure that there's been a lot of pushback. So I don't want to paint it as if it's an imminent thing. It is a bill. It's been proposed it's co-sponsored legislation, but boy, it would have amazing impacts on a lot of organizations, not just church security teams.
Yeah. Cindy just wrote, it's just in committee and it's not targeting churches, and it's for public paramilitary, not private safety teams. we have an Illinois rep. So that's what we know now. Sean Caston is on the bill. Call him, she said. Well, if we don't
Well,
have,
he's in Elmhurst, which is where I live. So hopefully I can say, hey, we need to have churches protected here. So hopefully he's going to be open to that.
listen, I say saunter on over and have a conversation.
Absolutely. Yeah, exactly. It's like, hey, Mr. Sean.
That's what I say.
It's gonna be St. Patrick's Day, and you have an Irish name.
Yeah, it's worth it.
Yes.
All right. If we don't have anything else, any other comments, questions, concerns?
Angelia, could I ask one last question?
Sure.
Thanks. So both you and Tim mentioned about social media monitoring as an awareness tool. Are there monitoring tools or software packages that are available that are geographic specific that you could put in search words like the pastoral staff or the name of the church community that would give you hits throughout the course of the week that you would know that something's happened? How do churches go about mining social media for potential things?
There actually are programs that geofence social media. You're going to ask me which one, and I'm not the tech guy and I don't play it on TV, but I do know that there are programs that will highlight specific phrases. But let me just say this, after working with my friend Dave Young from the FBI, he is really way more focused on having community awareness, because oftentimes, specific names aren't necessarily mentioned. There is software to do that. His is more along the lines of having staff, having key volunteers. If they become aware, I'll tell you what's shocking to me is how much information is shared by teenagers and kids. And so I think it's a component of training as well. And that's not sidestepping your issue. There is programmatic software, especially with AI now. I'm told that there's stuff coming out now that, is going to not just monitor key phrases, but the intent of the phrases. And ooh, scary, how much technology is out there. But I do think it's a critical component of your regular training when you're talking threats, that you do highlight the fact that oftentimes information becomes available, but somebody will discount it because A, they don't want to get involved, or B, they think, I don't want to, that's probably not the case. So boy, in today's world, you just can't do that anymore. So
yeah,
you're welcome for the non-answer, Chris.
Yeah, it's all good, Tim. If you guys come up with a best practice that you're, either, Dave or whatever else, we'd be happy to know about it, right? And
great. Yeah.
I was gonna say if you have someone in IT, I talk to them about geofencing. That's kind of their terminology for it. Even though that's as much as I know enough to be dangerous.
Okay. Thank you, guys.
Sean, I'll put my email address. You're asking me about the emergency response plan. I'll put my email address in the chat for everybody so you can email us. Any other questions or comments? Can we thank these guys for being here tonight?
Thank you guys for coming. Thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate you guys so much. And I'm grateful you're here. And we are all here to serve the Big C Church. And that's all I have for you for tonight. Anybody want to close us out in prayer?
I'd love to. Heavenly Father, just want to thank you so much for the opportunity for all of us to serve you. Father, I pray that people would not see us, but they would see you, and that you would just flow through us Give us spiritual eyes to see where the enemy is working, where the enemy is coming onto our property of our churches. And, you know, Satan wants to devour your sheep and hurt your sheep. And we have the opportunity to serve your sheep and keep bad things from happening. We thank you for this wonderful opportunity to serve you. It's a privilege to serve you here. And I just ask that you would bless everyone here, keep them safe and healthy, and bless the hands of their work. To your honor and glory. Amen.